The best stories don't just entertain you, they stay with you. Sometimes it's a single conversation you can't stop thinking about, a choice you wish you could take back, or an ending that leaves you staring at the credits. Unlike movies or books, games make you part of the story. Today, we're looking at games that represent storytelling at its absolute best. Every one of these tells a story you'll remember long after you've put the controller down. Set during Japan's economic boom of the late 80s, it tells the parallel stories of two men whose lives are pulled into a brutal conflict over a seemingly insignificant piece of real estate. You follow a young man trying to protect his honor after being framed for murder, while another struggles against the criminal organization that stripped away his freedom and identity. Watching these two stories unfold separately before slowly intertwining gives the narrative incredible momentum, and by the end, both protagonists emerge as some of the most memorable characters in gaming. Outside the main story, it also constantly surprises you. One moment, you're witnessing heartbreaking betrayals between lifelong friends, and the next you're helping a struggling musician, managing a cabaret club, or singing karaoke with complete sincerity. That tonal contrast shouldn't work. Yet it somehow makes the emotional moments even stronger by reminding you that these characters are more than hardened criminals. Combat is fast, stylish, and packed with personality thanks to multiple fighting styles that encourage experimentation. Some encounters become repetitive over the game's lengthy campaign, but those quieter moments strengthen your connections to places that feel genuinely alive rather than simple backdrops. By the time the credits roll, it delivers more than an excellent crime story. Few games make you laugh 1 minute and completely break your heart the next with such confidence. BioShock proved that first-person shooters could tell stories every bit as compelling as the RPGs and adventure games that usually dominated discussions about narrative. Beneath its gunplay and plasmid powers lies a mystery that slowly unfolds inside one of gaming's most unforgettable settings. The underwater city of Rapture, a failed utopia built on the promise of absolute freedom. As you explore its crumbling halls, every room tells part of the city's downfall. Audio diaries, abandoned apartments, and broken laboratories gradually reveal how ambition, greed, and unchecked ideology transform paradise into a nightmare. Rather than relying on lengthy cutscenes, BioShock trusts players to piece together its world themselves. Combat gives you plenty of freedom, encouraging creative combinations of firearms and genetic abilities that let you electrocute flooded rooms, set enemies ablaze, or manipulate security systems to fight for you. While the shooting itself has aged compared to modern FPS titles, the variety keeps encounters engaging. The final act is often criticized for leaning too heavily into straightforward action, and the final boss lacks the elegance of everything that came before. But those issues do little to diminish the experience as a whole. What truly cements BioShock among gaming's greatest stories is how seamlessly it blends philosophy into its world without ever feeling like a lecture. Every major revelation recontextualizes what came before, culminating in one of the most iconic twists in gaming history. It's the kind of story that rewards a second playthrough because you notice clues that were hiding in plain sight all along. Most games ask you to save the world, while Spiritfarer asks you to help people let go of it. What begins as a charming management game about sailing across a colorful ocean gradually reveals itself to be one of the most compassionate explorations of grief, loss, and acceptance ever told through an interactive medium. Your role is to guide lost souls so that they can peacefully move on. Along the way, you'll build homes aboard your ship, prepare their favorite meals, share conversations, and slowly learn about the lives they left behind. There are no villains to defeat or kingdoms to save. Instead, every destination, every upgrade, and every quiet moment exists to deepen your connection with characters whose journeys are all moving toward the same inevitable farewell. The gameplay blends resource gathering, crafting, farming, fishing, and light platforming into a relaxing routine that mirrors the game's themes of care and companionship. While these systems remain enjoyable for much of the adventure, they can become repetitive and pacing can be deliberately slow. Yet that slower rhythm is exactly what gives each goodbye its emotional weight. What makes it extraordinary is that it never treats death as something to fear. Instead, it portrays it as a deeply personal journey. Every spirit has a different story to tell, and every farewell feels earned because you've shared part of their lives before helping them move on. It reminds you that the people we lose are never truly gone, as long as the love they gave continues to travel with us. Uncharted 4 closes Nathan Drake's story with a mix of high-stakes treasure hunting and quiet reflection. Years after leaving his dangerous life behind, Nate is pulled back in by the sudden return of his long-lost brother Sam, leading to one last globe-trotting search for pirate treasure. The set pieces are as spectacular as ever. Collapsing towers, high-speed chases, and a now-famous Jeep sequence that blurs the line between cutscene and gameplay. But what makes this entry stand out is its slower, more personal side. Conversations with Elena, doubts about Sam's motives, and the weight of Nate's past choices give the game an emotional depth the earlier entries only hinted at. That slower pace won't be for everyone. Some stretches favor climbing and dialogue over constant action, which might test players looking for pure adrenaline. Still, it's this balance that makes the big moments hit harder. You feel the years Nate has spent chasing danger, and you understand why he might finally want to stop. As a send-off, it's satisfying without feeling like fan service. It respects the character's history while letting him walk away on his own terms, leaving the series with both a bang and a sense of closure. At first glance, Spec Ops: The Line looks like another military shooter. Sand-covered cities, cover-based firefights, and a squad of soldiers on a mission that seems straightforward enough. But it doesn't take long before the game begins pulling the rug out from under you. What starts as a rescue operation in a ruined Dubai slowly transforms into one of the most unsettling examinations of war ever told in a video game. You are sent alongside your squad to locate the missing battalion after a series of devastating sandstorms. The deeper you push into the city, the harder it becomes to separate heroism from obsession. Unlike most shooters where every fight feels justified, this constantly forces you to question whether your actions are making anything better at all. The game doesn't simply ask you to witness moral dilemmas. It makes you participate in them, then refuses to let you hide behind the excuse that you were just following the mission. Mechanically, it's a competent third-person shooter, though even at release, it wasn't revolutionary. Enemy encounters become repetitive, squad commands are basic, and the cover shooting never reaches the polish of genre leaders like Gears of War. But that's almost beside the point. The gameplay exists to make you comfortable before the narrative deliberately dismantles those expectations. The pacing grows darker with every chapter, building toward a finale that's still discussed more than a decade later. It's one of the few games that doesn't celebrate violence. Long after the credits roll, you'll remember the uncomfortable questions the game leaves behind.
Hey, can you hear me?
SOMA begins like a straightforward science fiction horror game. You wake up after a routine brain scan expecting little more than a medical procedure, only to find yourself trapped in an abandoned research facility at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Strange machines roam the halls. Humanity appears to have vanished, and every answer only leads to even more unsettling questions. But the monsters aren't what make it unforgettable. You play as an ordinary man trying to understand how he ended up in a world that no longer makes sense. The deeper you explore, the more the game shifts away from survival horror and toward philosophy. It asks questions few games dare to tackle. Rather than presenting easy answers, it trusts players to wrestle with these dilemmas themselves. Gameplay leans heavily on exploration, environmental storytelling, and puzzle solving instead of combat. Much like Amnesia before it, avoiding danger is usually smarter than confronting it. Some players found the stealth sections frustrating, with enemies occasionally disrupting the pacing rather than enhancing the horror. Fortunately, the game includes a safe mode that lets players focus almost entirely on the narrative. What makes the game exceptional is how its emotional impact grows long after you've finished playing. The final hour doesn't rely on a shocking twist so much as an unavoidable realization. Every decision, every conversation, and every discovery quietly builds toward an ending that's both inevitable and devastating. Most murder mysteries are about discovering who committed the crime. Pentiment is more interested in something far more complicated: how history is remembered, distorted, and rewritten over generations. Set in a 16th century Bavarian village during the upheaval of the Protestant Reformation, it trades swords and dragons for monks, peasants, artists, and ordinary people whose lives are quietly shaped by forces far beyond their control. You play as an artist working in a monastery when a murder throws the entire community into turmoil. Every decision you make influences not only the investigation, but the relationships you build with the villagers over the course of several decades. Unlike most detective games, this rarely offers clear-cut answers. Evidence can be incomplete, witnesses can lie, and time is always working against you. Gameplay revolves almost entirely around conversations, investigation, and meaningful choices rather than combat. Your education and background determine what knowledge brings into discussions, opening some opportunities while permanently closing others. It creates the feeling that you're playing a real person instead of an all-knowing detective. Visually, Pentiment stand apart from almost every modern game. Its hand-painted manuscript art style doesn't just look beautiful. It reinforces the setting, making every page feel like a medieval illustration brought to life. Combined with exceptional historical research and remarkably believable characters, it creates an authenticity that's rarely seen in gaming. More than a murder mystery, Pentiment becomes a story about memory itself, showing how history isn't always shaped by facts, but by the stories people choose to pass on. When The Last of Us launched in 2013, it proved that a game about survival could be just as much about people as it is about danger. Joel and Ellie's cross-country journey through a ruined America isn't just a road trip. It's a slow build of trust, conflict, and unspoken care in a world where kindness is a liability. The storytelling works because it's grounded. The infected are a constant threat, but the real tension often comes from human encounters: desperate survivors, brutal raiders, and those trying to cling to some form of order. The dialogue feels lived in, and the quieter moments between the two leads hit just as hard as the big action beats. Gameplay-wise, it's not revolutionary. Stealth, scavenging, and crafting are familiar systems, but they're tightly tuned to feed the atmosphere. Every bullet matters. Every choice to engage or avoid a fight has weight. Some criticize it for being too linear or for leaning heavily on scripted sequences, but that's also what gives it its cinematic rhythm. It knows when to slow down and when to hit you hard. The ending, still debated to this day, refuses to give easy answers, which is exactly why it sticks. Metal Gear Solid 3 isn't just the best entry in Kojima's legendary series. It's one of the greatest character-driven stories gaming has ever produced. Set during the Cold War decades before the events of the original Metal Gear, it follows Naked Snake on what should have been a straightforward mission that becomes a deeply personal tragedy. Unlike most espionage stories that focus on gadgets and conspiracies, Snake Eater constantly reminds you that every mission has a human cost. As Snake ventures through dense Soviet jungles, he isn't simply eliminating enemies. He's confronting former allies, questioning his orders, and slowly uncovering the truth behind his mentor. Their relationship forms the emotional backbone of the entire game. The gameplay still feels remarkably fresh. Survival mechanics ask you to hunt wildlife, treat injuries, camouflage yourself, and adapt to changing environments, making every mission feel more grounded than its predecessors. Boss encounters are equally memorable, each designed around unique ideas rather than simply testing your aim. Some mechanics, Particularly inventory management and camera controls in the original release can feel dated today. What truly separates it from other action games is its willingness to let quiet moments breathe. Conversations around a campfire, codec calls filled with unexpected humor, and long stretches of solitude make the eventual emotional climax all the more devastating. Its final hour delivers one of gaming's most unforgettable endings, and leaves you questioning whether heroes are defined by the victories history remembers or the sacrifices history chooses to forget.
By selecting camouflage.
Undertale begins like a familiar retro RPG. A child falls into an underground world filled with monsters, strange characters, and turn-based battles. At first, it feels like a nostalgic tribute to classic role-playing games. But the longer you play, the more it becomes clear that it wants to challenge everything you've come to expect from them. The story unfolds through an unforgettable cast of characters, from the endlessly optimistic Papyrus to the sarcastic Sans and the lonely King Ascari. Each encounter feels personal because the game encourages conversation instead of violence. Every enemy can be defeated through understanding rather than combat, transforming battles into puzzles where empathy is often the strongest weapon. That simple idea fundamentally changes how players think about conflict. Mechanically, the combat is just as inventive. Traditional turn-based commands are mixed with bullet-hell dodging sections, forcing you to actively avoid enemy attacks while deciding how to respond. It's a surprisingly engaging system that constantly introduces new ideas without overstaying its welcome. The visuals are intentionally simple, embracing a retro aesthetic that may appear modest compared to modern RPGs, and some players may find the humor or self-aware writing a little too quirky. What truly makes Undertale unforgettable is how it remembers. Your actions matter in ways few games dare attempt, and the consequences often extend beyond a single playthrough. It constantly blurs the line between player and character, making you question not only what choices you're making, but why you're making them. Few indie games have influenced the industry as profoundly as Undertale, and even fewer have managed to say so much with so little. Before Persona 3, the series was niche. This was the game that pushed it into the spotlight, blending everyday school life with supernatural battles against shadow creatures. By day, you manage classes, friendships, and part-time jobs. By night, you climb Tartarus, a massive, otherworldly tower that appears during the hidden dark hour. The hook isn't just the stylish combat or the time management system. It's how those two have feed into each other. The relationships you build during the day directly strengthen you in battle, making your choices feel meaningful. And while the social sim side is colorful and often lighthearted, the main story is anything but. Themes of mortality and the inevitability of loss run throughout, giving the ending a real emotional punch. Still, it's a game of its time. Tartarus is repetitive, with randomly generated floors that can blur together, and the AI-controlled teammates in the original version can be frustrating. Later releases, like Persona 3 Portable and the upcoming Reload remake, improve on these issues, but the original still has a certain atmosphere that's hard to replicate. It's not flawless, but proved that a JRPG could blend slice-of-life charm with heavy, thought-provoking storytelling. And that formula would go on to define the series' global success.
A choice?
Detroit Become Human puts you in control of 3 android protagonists, Connor, Kara, and Marcus, each navigating their own path in a near future where artificial intelligence is on the verge of rebellion. It's an interactive drama where your decisions shape the story in big and small ways, branching into dozens of possible outcomes. The game's biggest strength is how those choices feel immediate. Fail a quick time event, and a character can die. The story doesn't reset to save them. Each lead offers a different perspective. Connor's detective work mixes tension and investigation. Kara's journey is personal and human, and Marcus's arc tackles the larger political fight for android rights. Not all writing lands equally well. Some moments lean heavy on cliches, and certain metaphors for real-world oppression lack subtlety. But when it works, it works. Small, quiet scenes can hit just as hard as the high-stakes set pieces. Visually, it's one of the most polished narrative games of its kind, with impressive motion capture and detail. And thanks to the branching design, it has strong replay value, encouraging you to see how wildly different your story could have turned out.
I would kill for it, I would happily die.
Red Dead Redemption 2 is less about checking off objectives and more about inhabiting a place and time. Set in the fading days of the Wild West, it follows Arthur Morgan as he wrestles with loyalty to his gang and the creeping realization that the world is moving on without them. The detail is staggering, from weather that changes how your horse moves to townsfolk who remember how you treated them. That immersion makes even mundane moments, like riding through the countryside at sunrise, feel cinematic. But that same commitment to realism is also what turns some players off. Movement can feel heavy, animations are deliberate, and the pace demands patience. Story-wise, it's one of Rockstar's most human narratives. Arthur isn't a one-note outlaw. He's layered, conflicted, and capable of real growth depending on your choices. The supporting cast feels equally fleshed out, making later story beats hit harder because you've spent so much quiet time with them. It's not a game for rushing. If you go in expecting constant action, the slow build might frustrate you. But if you let it breathe, RDR2 delivers one of the richest, most affecting worlds gaming has seen, and an ending that lingers long after the credits roll.
As you live,
Heavy Rain is built on one question. How far would you go to save someone you love? Told through 4 playable characters connected by the hunt for the origami killer. It's a branching, interactive drama where your decisions can change or abruptly end the story. Its biggest strength is tension. Scenes often play out like a chain of small but stressful moments. Holding your breath during a break-in, fumbling through a high-stakes chase, or deciding whether to cross a moral line. Failures aren't just game over screens. They push the narrative in unexpected directions, and the game never stops to reset your mistakes. Not everything lands perfectly. The voice acting is uneven, some dialogue feels awkward, and the infamous Press X to Jason meme shows how easily a serious moment can slip into unintentional comedy. But when the story hits its stride, the mix of mystery, urgency, and emotional stakes works. It's not flawless, but Heavy Rain was an early example of choice-driven storytelling in games that treated consequences as permanent. And it paved the way for many narrative titles that came after. To the Moon doesn't look like much at first glance. It uses a pixel art style. There are no big battles, no elaborate mechanics. Just a simple framework for telling one of the most emotional stories ever put into a game. And that's exactly why it stuck with so many players. The premise is quietly devastating. You play as 2 doctors who grant dying patients a final wish by implanting memories into their minds. Their latest client, Johnny, wants to go to the moon, though he can't explain why. What makes To the Moon remarkable is how much it does with so little. The pixel visuals are modest, but the writing and pacing carry enormous weight. Every revelation feels intimate, every memory stitched together with care. And then there's the music. King Gao's soundtrack has become iconic. It's not flawless. Some players felt the dialogue could get heavy-handed, and because there's so little gameplay, others dismissed it as more of a visual novel than a proper RPG. But that simplicity is part of its charm. It focuses entirely on its narrative and emotional resonance, cutting away everything else that might dilute the experience. Looking back, To the Moon was one of the early titles that showed indie games didn't need big budgets to leave a mark. It became a cult classic, praised for making players cry in ways most blockbusters couldn't. For anyone who doubts that games can be powerful storytelling devices, Unassuming Journey to the Stars is a reminder that sometimes the smallest steps leave the deepest footprints. Leave the deepest footprints. The 2018 reboot of God of War didn't just change the series setting, it reshaped its identity. Trading the over-the-top chaos of Greek mythology for the colder, more restrained world of Norse legends. It follows Kratos as he travels with his son Atreus to fulfill his late wife's final wish. The combat is still heavy and satisfying, with the Leviathan axe quickly becoming one of the most iconic weapons in gaming. But what stands out most is how the action serves the story. Every fight, puzzle, and quiet boat ride deepens the bond and tension between father and son. Kratos, once defined by rage, is now a man wrestling with how to teach strength without passing on his own flaws. The single-shot camera design pulls you closer to the journey, but it also means the pacing can feel tight in some spots and padded in others. Side content varies in quality. Some favors and collectibles feel like filler, yet the best optional quests rival the main story in depth and payoff. It's a rare reboot that respects its roots while confidently becoming something new, proving that a blockbuster action game can deliver just as much emotional weight as spectacle.
They're called Max?
Yeah, okay.
When Life is Strange first released, it immediately stood out. Not because of its graphics or mechanics, but because it told a small, personal story in a genre dominated by spectacle. At its heart, it's about a photography student who discovers she has the power to rewind time. That setup sounds like sci-fi, but the game never loses sight of its real focus: the friendships, heartbreak, and choices that shape who we are. The story unfolds in the fictional town of Arcadia Bay. What makes the game so compelling isn't just the supernatural hook, it's how grounded everything feels. Conversations are awkward and messy, the choices never easy, and the consequences often painful. Of course, the game has its flaws, and they're worth acknowledging. The dialogue has been criticized for feeling forced or cringe, especially with some of the slang. The lip syncing and animations often looked stiff even at launch, making it feel dated compared to other 2015 releases. But despite those rough edges, the emotional weight of its story pushed through. For many players, the rewind mechanic was simple but effective, letting you play out what-if scenarios without ever being able to fully escape the consequences. You could fix small mistakes, but the bigger decisions always came back to haunt you. That balance between control and inevitability gave the narrative a bittersweet tension.
Chloe will die.
Nier Automata looks like a stylish action game at first glance. Fast combat, flashy moves, and a cast of sleek android protagonists. But beneath the surface, it's a deeply layered story about identity, purpose, and what it means to exist at all. Playing as 2B, 9S, and later A2, you uncover truths about the war between androids and machines that shift your understanding of everything you've been told. The gameplay blends Platinum Games' fluid combat with light RPG elements, platforming, and even genre shifts, at times turning into a bullet hell shooter or text adventure without warning. This variety keeps it fresh, even if some side quests can feel like padding. What makes it special is how it uses multiple playthroughs to reveal its full story. The first run gives you one perspective. The second reframes it entirely. And by the final endings, you realize the game's been leading you towards something far more emotional and human than you expected. It's not perfect. The open world is sparse in places, and the combat, while satisfying, isn't as deep as other Platinum titles. But Nier Automata is the kind of game that lingers in your head, not because of its mechanics, but because it makes you feel something rare: hope in the middle of hopelessness. When Final Fantasy VII landed in 1997, it didn't just launch a new chapter for the series. It changed what people thought a video game story could be. Cloud's journey from detached mercenary to reluctant hero plays out against a world struggling under corporate greed, environmental collapse, and an enemy who's as personal as he is cosmic. The Midgar opening remains one of the strongest in RPG history, dropping you straight into a rebellion with no slow onboarding. From there, the story widens into something far more complex, balancing large-scale stakes with intimate character arcs. Aerith, Tifa, Barrett, and the rest aren't just sidekicks. They have their own motivations, flaws, and growth. Of course, not every part has aged perfectly. The translation is clumsy in places, pacing dips in the middle act, and the blocky character models can be a shock to new players. But the writing and atmosphere still carry it, and the score remains unforgettable. The remake reimagines the early part of the story with modern visuals and expanded scenes, but the original's raw charm is hard to replicate. For all its imperfections, Final Fantasy VII blends emotion, spectacle, and ambition in a way that made it a cultural touchstone, and it's still worth experiencing in its original form.
This hasn't been emptied for over a week.
Disco Elysium is unlike anything else in gaming. Released in 2019, it throws away traditional combat systems and replaces them with conversation, inner monologues, and the kind of political and philosophical debates you'd expect from a dense novel. You play as a washed-up detective who wakes up after a catastrophic bender, unsure of who he is or what he believes in, tasked with solving a murder in the decaying city of Revachol. But the real story isn't just about solving the case. It's about piecing together your fractured identity. What makes this game so powerful is how it treats choice. Every dialogue option matters. Every skill you invest in shapes not just your detective's abilities, but his worldview. Your stats don't just determine combat. They're voices in your head, arguing with you, influencing your decisions, sometimes sabotaging them. It's messy, unpredictable, and deeply human. Yet for all its brilliance, Disco Elysium can be daunting. Its walls of text and slow pacing turn away players looking for action-heavy gameplay. Some found it too political, too heavy-handed in its critiques of ideology and society. But that's also the point. It's unapologetically cerebral, demanding your patience and attention. Despite being overlooked by many, those who stuck with it found one of the richest role-playing experiences ever created. It's a game that proves storytelling in gaming doesn't always need explosions or cutscenes. It can be driven by dialogue, thought, and the haunting question of who you really are.
Take too long. I need a proper...
Set in 14th century France during the Black Death, A Plague Tale: Innocence is less about historical accuracy and more about human connection under impossible circumstances. You play as Amisha, a young noble forced to protect her sickly younger brother Hugo as the Inquisition hunts them and plague-ridden rats swarm the land. The gameplay leans on stealth and puzzle-solving rather than combat. You're not a warrior, you're a survivor, making every escape feel tense. The rat swarms are a standout mechanic. Moving like a living tide, you have to manipulate with light and fire. It's simple in concept, but creates some unforgettable set pieces. The story is carried by Amisha and Hugo's evolving relationship. Early resentment gives way to genuine care, and their small victories feel meaningful in a world that offers them little hope. Still, the dialogue can be uneven at times, and stealth encounters sometimes feel more trial and error than strategic. Visually, it punches above its weight for a mid-budget title, with striking lighting and atmospheric environments. By the end, it's not the rats or the plague that stick with you. It's the bond between two siblings who never ask for heroism, but find it anyway.
I also see
Lost Odyssey takes the classic turn-based JRPG formula and weaves it into a story about immortality, memory, and the weight of time. You play as Kame, a man who has lived for 1,000 years, yet remembers almost none of it, until fragments of his past start returning through dreamlike short stories. The combat is traditional but well-polished, blending magic, physical skills, and a timing-based ring system that adds a bit of engagement to each attack. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel, but it nails the fundamentals in a way that feels deliberate and confident. What really sets it apart are the 1,000 Years of Dreams segments, text-based vignettes that read like intimate short stories, exploring moments of love, loss, and the quiet tragedies that come with living too long. These sections slow the game down, but they give it an emotional weight most RPGs never reach. Pacing can be uneven, and load times in the original release were notoriously long, but the payoff is a heartfelt, reflective adventure that feels like the spiritual successor to the golden era of JRPGs. For players willing to take their time, it's one of the genre's hidden treasures. Silent Hill 2 isn't about jump scares. It's about something slower, heavier, a dread that seeps in and lingers long after you stop playing. You step into the shoes of James Sunderland, who comes to the fog-choked town after receiving a letter from his wife who's been dead for years. The story works because it's personal. The monsters aren't just random horrors. They're tied to James's guilt and the town's ability to manifest inner darkness. It's unsettling in ways that go beyond the usual horror beats, making you question the main character as much as the world around him. The PS2 era controls and clunky combat can feel rough now, and the camera occasionally fights you more than the enemies do. But here, those flaws almost work in the game's favor, amplifying the discomfort. The oppressive atmosphere, haunting soundtrack, and deliberate pacing make it feel more like a psychological descent than a standard survival horror game. Even decades later, few games match how Silent Hill 2 uses ambiguity and restraint. It doesn't explain everything. It leaves space for interpretation, and that's part of why it's still discussed, dissected, and remembered as one of the most impactful horror narratives in gaming. Telltale's The Walking Dead isn't about mowing down hordes of zombies. It's about the people you meet while the world falls apart. Playing as Lee Everett, you're tasked with protecting a young girl named Clementine, and the choices you make shape not only your story, but how those around you see you. The game's strength lies in its writing. Conversations feel natural, characters have layered personalities, and relationships change based on your actions. It's not about finding the right choice. It's about deciding what you can live with, knowing you'll have to face the consequences later. The gameplay is light on traditional mechanics, leaning heavily on dialogue choices and quick-time events. Some players might find it too passive, but the format works for the kind of story it wants to tell. Technical issues, like choppy performance on older platforms, can break immersion, but the emotional core stays strong. By the time the first season ends, you're not just playing for survival. You're making decisions for someone who's watching, learning, and growing. And that responsibility hits harder than any jump scare.
Close call back there. Thanks for